welcome to the CraveCast. I am your host, Eric Mack, live from CNET's always busy Taos, New Mexico bureau. And joining me live in the CNET studios there in San Francisco are Kelsey Adams, Jeff Sparkman, and behind the controls today, as always, Stephen Beecham. And we also have a very special guest there in the studio today as well. If you don't know his name, you probably should, because he's the man who is helping to shape the voice of our species, if not our entire planet. Among many other titles, he's the president of METI International, which stands for Messaging Extraterrestrial Intelligence, which is what we'll be talking with him about today. Please welcome Dr. Douglas Vakoch.
Welcome.
Thanks very much.
So for the next 30 minutes or so, we're going to be talking about the search for alien intelligence and what do we do beyond just looking for ET. You can be a part of the conversation in our YouTube and live stream chat rooms, and you can also tweet at us at Crave, C-R-A-V-E, and at Eric C. Mack. With any questions or comments, we'll be monitoring those. So to start, Doug, a lot of people I think probably know what SETI is, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, but you've started a new organization just in the last couple of months here called Messaging Extraterrestrial Intelligence. What is that exactly?
Well,
what's METI?
As you say, SETI is well understood. So the search for extraterrestrial intelligence using big radio telescopes to look for signals from alien civilizations at distant stars. And so SETI has been going on for over 55 years now. And it's getting bigger and better and more powerful every year. But METI looks at the flip side. So at METI International, we're asking the question, what happens if everyone out there in the cosmos is doing exactly what we're doing, everyone's listening, but no one is taking the initiative to make contact? And so our core mission is to create messages that would be representative of humankind and send them out into the cosmos. And, messaging is also a bit broader. We have to grapple with how do you actually create a message and how do you understand communication and intelligence here on our own world. But there's an interrelated suite of research and educational projects we have. They're all related to this idea of innovative ways to make contact with extraterrestrial intelligence.
And so I guess, the first question a lot of people would ask, and some of the folks there in the room, we've had conversations about, why is this something we would want to do? I mean, why is it a good idea? I mean, some might say it's potentially a dangerous idea, depending on who hears the message or reads the message, right?
Right. Well, I think the short answer is throughout human history, we have learned a lot when we encounter new cultures. And so encountering a radically alien culture gives us an opportunity to get a completely new perspective on ourselves. But Eric, you asked this great question. It might be interesting, but is it safe? And no less a brilliant person than Stephen Hawking has said, whatever you do, do not transmit our location to the Earth to the extraterrestrials. They may come and strip mine our planet, and who knows what would happen. So we should shut up. I guess my response to Stephen Hawking is twofold. First of all, when he said that, he gave that warning back in 2009, he had no idea that planets like Earth are plentiful. So look, the man is indisputably a genius, but he can't predict the future. Now we know that there are Earth-like planets everywhere. The other point, maybe even more important, is that if there's a civilization that has the ability to travel between the stars and do whatever they went to us here, they can pick up I Love Lucy, Howard Stern, and CNET transmissions that are going out there. So we've already exposed ourselves. The idea of being intentional about our messaging is saying, let's not just let accidental leakage be our ambassadors. Let's decide what we want to say to another world.
Now, my response to that, I'm the designated pessimist.
Yeah.
By the way. So let's say this.
So you're not honestly pessimistic, but you have to play that. Oh yeah, okay, good, excellent, good.
No, because it's one thing to say, yes, they already know we're here, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we are actively pestering them and trying to get their attention. We could get prioritized, like, oh, well, they're clearly challenging us, let's go stop them. Or, oh, well, they're clearly pacifist and weak, let's go take them,
And so what we need to do is look at the motivations that they might have. But if we look at human history, we see that attempts to isolate ourselves from other civilizations typically hasn't turned out well. And so that if, in fact, they do know that we're here already, my stance is that it's best to take that message in control. If they're actually going to come and arrive here, then let's have an encounter with them and let's let them know that we want to engage.
But isn't it actually, I mean, I don't mean actually, but isn't it maybe slightly more likely that our relationship when we meet them will be, that great cultural insight we get is more likely to be the smallpox equivalent, like we're likely to be on the wiped out end of that scale.
Well, we're likely,
if they get here first.
If the extraterrestrials get here, they are technologically superior to us.
Is what I meant.
So the reality is, they could do whatever they want. But my position is, if they are going to come here, I don't want to just wait and cower in the corner and let them do whatever, but let them know that there is more that they can benefit from having us as intelligent interlocutors than simply to wipe us out. I think one of the challenges that people often have, and one of the reasons people have been opposed to METI in the past, is the whole idea of what in the world do we have to say? If they have the ability to travel between the stars, or even if they're staying at home, but they're 1 million years longer lived than we are, what do we have to say that is of value? In a sense, I think it's almost a cosmic inferiority complex that we have. But I would say, look, there may be wiser aliens out there, more technologically powerful aliens. There's never going to be a more human alien, though. So I think there's something unique about us that they can't create in a test tube. It's
a very classic sci-fi perspective.
Well, I think it's a classic
sci-fi. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean that in a good way.
No. And I think that's true because, this isn't just about technology. This is about, what do we care about? And so I think that's the other flip side of the benefit of doing this. It's not even if we make contact, but in the process of crafting the messages that we send out, we need to think about what do we care about? How do we want to represent ourselves?
Let me hold my sci-fi questions and give this back.
Yeah, so you guys created a website called Earth Speaks, which allows people to upload their messages to the aliens. And a lot of the people were talking about, you found it interesting that a lot of people were talking about that we don't think of ourselves as alone in the universe, right? And that's an important distinction for aliens to know, that we're not that, we don't think that we're so amazing.
We don't think that we're so amazing. One of the things SETI scientists have often speculated about is if we actually do make contact, then the differences between cultures here on Earth are going to seem minuscule in comparison to the differences between us and extraterrestrials. And so the idea is that if we make contact, it'll be sort of a unifying nature. We won't think of ourselves as coming from different nations or religions.
Yeah.
Turns out that actually thinking about the messages we want to send start that process. So one of the themes we saw in those Earth Speaks messages are, it's not like I come from California or I'm a Buddhist or I'm a Christian, but I'm a member of the planet Earth and we want to make contact.
That's cool. Very interesting. What sorts of messages, have you guys sent out any messages now? I mean, I know like Voyager sent out things a long time ago, but are you guys actively sending messages now, and what types of messages are you sending?
We aren't. Our organization isn't sending messages, but there have been, over the last couple of decades, a number of messages that have gone out. As you mentioned, the Voyager spacecraft went out with a recording images, sounds of Earth, greetings in 55 languages. There has been the Pioneer plaque on a couple of Pioneer spacecraft that NASA has launched. And there have been demonstrations of our ability to transmit. So from the world's largest radio telescope in Arecibo, Puerto Rico, there was a powerful transmission in 1974 and a couple of follow-up ones. So we're very interested, and if you go to our website and look at our strategic plan, this outlines what our goals are over the next 3 years. And our goal is to have messages go out. But we want to really engage in a conversation about what should be in those messages, and are there risks? I mean, you've raised questions, Kelsey, about is it dangerous to do that? We want to have that very transparent discussion. What I hear when SETI scientists talk about this is that people are getting worried about this for no reason. Really? Again, if the aliens can do us any harm, it's too late. And so let's take the message into our own hands.
Gotcha.
So when I knew you were coming in, Doug, I actually dug up some reporting I did like a decade ago when I was a public radio reporter, and I went down to a place in southern New Mexico where they're basically burying low-level nuclear waste about a half-mile under the ground. And so I talked to the people who are trying to come up with what kind of signs would we put at this site so that, 10,000 years down the road, people know not to dig and to keep out. How do you design a sign for a culture that's probably going to be very different than ours if there is one? And it strikes me as very similar to the kind of thing that you're working on, only what you're working on is cosmically harder. And, what they came up with, it was almost cartoonish and so basic. Yeah, that's it right there.
It's great. It's great if the extraterrestrials have a face like we do. But yeah, but you're right. So they wanted to communicate, and I suspect the folks who put that together were not very sanguine about the English text being intelligible.
Right.
But actually, it's and the challenge of marking these nuclear waste sites. So again, the goal is make something that's going to be meaningful 10,000 years from now after languages have changed radically, but make this also something that's not so intriguing that the aliens are going to take it as a challenge. So, one idea was to put up something kind of dangerous and spiky and make it look like, oh, there's something hazardous here. Or you might leave a message, but you can't construct it out of materials that are valuable. If it's a valuable metal, people are going to strip it away, and the message won't remain. So one of the recommendations that a semiotician, a scholar who focuses on the theory of signs, Thomas Sebiok, had said, is that you actually have to have what he called a nuclear priesthood, a priesthood in which you actually carry on from generation to generation the message, so that message can be adapted to changing language and changing cultures, and so that you don't leave the message to an artifact, but you leave it to a community that has as its goal communicating that warning.
So considering an oral tradition as actually being more lasting than data recording in this case.
An oral tradition as being more reliable, and we tend to think that the written word is the sacrosanct way of communicating, but if you look at how some sacred texts have been communicated, early Buddhist writings were writings. There was a strong oral tradition long before a written tradition. But that doesn't mean it was inaccurate. It's just they made a commitment to communicate orally.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
And so, have there been any real specific strategies that have been developed yet for devising messages, or how we think about these messages that we could possibly send out?
There have been, and the key is to try to figure out what is universal. So, aliens are not going to speak English or Swahili or French. They're not going to speak any of our natural languages. So, what language do we have in common with an alien? Well, if we're sending a radio signal to another world and they can build a radio telescope, we know that we have one thing in common with them: engineering. And it seems likely that if you're going to be a savvy engineer, you've got to know the basics of math, at least 2 + 2 = 4. And so that's the basic idea of starting with a language that builds on fundamental mathematical and scientific concepts and use that as a foundation. But then the challenge, of course, is if we only say, yeah, we know about the periodic table of elements as well, what's the point of this whole thing? And so what we want to do is leverage one of those possibly universal languages to talk about something that is unique about ourselves. So Steve mentioned the Voyager recording that has music from around Earth. Well, if you think about it, music is really kind of beautiful because in many ways, the basic structure of music can be described in terms of mathematics and physics, the things that an astronomer on other worlds should know about as well, and yet it conveys something about our emotionality. So those music, Steve is playing now the sounds of a baby from the Golden Record, and that's part of humanity.
What about so you're talking about music? What about like Close Encounters of the Third Kind? They have that musical piece. Do 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 do. Do you think there's any?
I think that's Jeopardy.
It's.
That's what I was going to say.
That's right. There is now. I wish that the mothership would come to Earth.
Yeah.
And we could actually have this jam session.
To it, yeah.
That's right. So I'm not counting on that. But I do think the idea of communicating in a musical way really frees us up from this hegemony that math and science have had. So, the folks who are most interested in SETI are mathematicians and computer scientists and astronomers. And so they tend to think about, this is what I want to know about.
Yeah.
But I think we also need to get out of that mindset, and so think about alternative ways of communicating as well.
I see.
So now, when you say, I know you're joking, but when you say you'd be excited if the mothership came down, so I wonder what your first response is emotionally when you hear stories like, did you hear the story over the weekend that there were some tapes released by NASA that proved that Apollo 10 astronauts heard like alien music? Did you see that going around the internet at all?
I didn't see it, but we get contacted all the time by people who've said, I've had an encounter, and my response is excellent. Show me something physical, because I'm a scientist. I need evidence. It's the same standard we use when we're looking for a signal from another star. We get a signal on a radio telescope. It looks good, but now we have to follow up to make sure it's not a glitch, make sure it's not some smart graduate students at MIT perpetuating a hoax, that we want to know if it's a real signal. So if someone has evidence of an extraterrestrial having come here, bring it to me and show it to me, and I'd love to see it.
Cool. Well, actually, we do have a video that we produced for CNET, and it is of the sound that they heard on Apollo 10. So I'll just play that real quick. It's only like 40 seconds.
Okay, very good.
That music even sounds outer spacey, doesn't it? You hear that? That whistling sound? Yeah. Woo! Look at your... Yeah, it sounds like, outer space type music. Okay, stand by. That's 1 and 3, high voltage off reset. That's 1. 2. Boy, that sure is weird music. No. It's a whistling, like an outer space type thing.
So is that sort of like what you guys hear all the time?
I agree. It sounds like weird music to me, or it sounds like radio interference. And so then the question is, if you really think that's an indication of another intelligence, where's the evidence of that? So we use a basic philosophical principle that is hundreds of years old, Occam's razor, which is the simplest explanation. And I'm hearing the audio recording of a technologically very sophisticated and yet a little bit bumpy and kind of seat of the pants operation, the early space mission.
Yeah.
My natural explanation is, it sounds like something kicking in on their radio.
Yeah,
So I don't hear anything, and I wish I did. I wish I heard something. The other thing to keep in mind, and this is true too, when people see things in the sky that they can't explain, I don't doubt people are seeing things. They're making sense out of it. And the most reasonable explanation they can come up with it must be an alien. Well, human beings evolved to make sense out of a chaotic and unpredictable world. We're very good at that. And if we don't know what something is, we'll come up with an explanation. The question is that initial explanation that we come up with the actual true explanation? And that's where we need to maintain skepticism. In ways, I'm glad to hear the X-Files is coming on.
Oh, yeah.
Because I feel like I'm sort of a cross between Mulder and Scully. I want to believe, but I need the evidence.
So
There we
Eric.
go.
Eric's had a very personal experience along these lines. I don't know if you want to talk about that.
So you've had a close encounter.
When I was in college, I did see a UFO, the one that you hear reports of with like the 3 red lights and a huge triangle. And I did write a story for CNET last year. I found some evidence that finally debunks that experience.
But it was a real experience. You had the experience. It was you saw what couldn't otherwise be explained, and that was years ago that you saw it, and it takes a while to come up with, how do you explain this? And again, this is the problem that we have in SETI as well. I mean, for people who've followed SETI fairly closely, you've heard about the WOW signal. So in the 1970s, there's this a huge signal that was detected at the Ohio State University Observatory, the Big Ear. And it looks like exactly what you would want to see. But there's only one problem. It's never replicated. And so we require replication. Not only will it have to look good, but the problem is we're looking for things like our own radio and TV signals all the time. So we need something that can be independently replicated as proof of an extraterrestrial.
Well, over the last 6 months, I mean, there has been a pretty interesting lead, and you and I have corresponded about it in the past, which is Tabistar, which is that star that has some crazy stuff orbiting it. and it could be a swarm of comets or perhaps alien megastructures. So, what was your initial reaction? And I wonder what your emotional reaction was when you first heard the details of this. If you were excited or you're like, we got to be skeptical. Or both.
Well, it can be both, because I'm excited because there's a specific target. So again, a little of the history. The full name of the star is KIC 846-2852. My own preference is it's called Tabistar all over the place. Honestly, I think it's a bit sexist. So it was identified by an astronomer named Tabitha Boyajian. Let's call it Boyajian star. I mean, there is one of the early stars that was discovered very near Earth is Barnard star. We don't call it Ed star. So Boyajian star, beautiful star because it was identified as by the Kepler mission, NASA's Kepler mission, which looks for a slight dimming of a planet as it travels between the star and us here on Earth. So when that pass by happens, there's this minute dimming. So an Earth-sized planet, it dims by maybe a millionth. The wondrous thing about Boyajian star is that dimming happened by up to 20%. And when you and I talked back in November or December, Eric, the hope was that, well, there's this natural explanation. Maybe just at the right time Kepler was looking at this star, there's a swarm of comets that went by, and that's what accounted for it. And it would be a freaky accident. So why was Kepler looking at just the right time? Freaky things happen when you're looking at 150,000 stars. So it could have been the case. And so for several months, the cometary explanation was the best explanation, but now looks like that's off the table. And over the last couple of weeks, an astronomer has pointed out, who's gone back to the records over the last century and seen that there has actually been a low-level dimming over the course of 100 years. So that would require a huge flock of comets. And so the cometary explanation doesn't seem any good. So, it was a one possibility that was suggested is maybe it's this huge megastructure that was created by extraterrestrial engineers, put in orbit. Sometimes people talk about it as a Dyson swarm, named after physicist Freeman Dyson. So it's something in orbit, maybe to capture the sunlight of that star. And that's what's occluding us. And so our question was, if in fact there is an alien megastructure, there be aliens who are signaling to us. So there have been observations at the SETI Institute's Allen Telescope Array, and METI International is collaborating with an observatory in Panama, Boquete, Panama, to look for brief laser pulses. Bad news is we haven't seen any. We didn't expect to. And so that's the skepticism part of my reaction. The initial reaction is, well, it's great. This is the kind of thing that we would want to look at, but then we have to actually look there and see if we see any evidence. And so far, no evidence of an alien civilization, at least sending intentional signals.
Right. They'd have to, the way you're looking, as I understand it, it would have to be really intentional. You
it would
can't
have to be
see, like their TV signals.
If they're TV signals, I was making the case earlier that if you're an alien civilization that has the ability to travel to Earth and do us any harm, you can pick up our leakage signals. That's not true for us. I mean, humans, our technology cannot pick up our leakage radiation, even at the distance of the nearest star. So for us to succeed in our contemporary SETI projects, we need to have a directly transmitted signal. Now, we have the technology to do that. So you go to the world's largest radio telescope in Arecibo, Puerto Rico, this huge dish carved into the side of the Earth, that can transmit powerful signals used in asteroid studies. It's mapping these Earth-threatening asteroids that come swooping by Earth periodically. And that can also be used and has been used to transmit messages. So, on a galactic scale, if there are civilizations out there, I'm guessing we're pretty rudimentary, but even a young civilization like ours has the ability to send a message that another comparably young civilization could pick up. And so that's what METI International is interested in, using that capacity. We're not going to let anything from any of the Sigourney Weaver alien movies that could come to Earth and do us harm know about us. But if there's another twin of Earth with a comparable technology to ours, that could be a message that really does provide the first indication that we're here.
So is there a list of likely targets right now? If there was a message that was ready and we were ready to send it out, what would we aim it at? Like Proxima Centauri or
You know,
Boyagian star or what?
I'd certainly send one to Boyagian Star. Why not? You know, the only downside is it takes close to 1,500 years to get there. So a reply wouldn't be for another 3,000 years. That light that we're seeing from Boyagian Star right now left shortly after the fall of the Roman Empire. So, you know, for anyone who has any concerns about what's going to happen on Earth, actually picking a target far away has a nice element. My preference would actually be to target stars that are close to Earth. So, you know, one way to think about it is, well, how many stars are there that are even close to Earth? So if you go out to 25 parsecs, it's an astronomical unit. It's about a little over 80 light years, the distance light can travel in 80 years. There are about 2,800 stars. And from Arecibo, you could target about a tenth of, or about 800 or so of those stars. And I would sample those stars that could be targeted from Arecibo that we already know have planets around them. And there are 27 of those targets. But on the other hand, what we're learning every day is that almost every star has planets around them. There are a lot of stars that we haven't detected their planets, but just on statistical grounds, we've done enough of the sampling to know that planets are everywhere. So there are a lot of advantages to targeting nearby stars. And the advantage there is, you know, at its best, METI is a long-term project, but potentially success could come in decades, maybe centuries, rather than millennia, if we focus on relatively nearby stars.
So, you know, there's this concept called the Fermi Paradox that I'm sure you're familiar with, which, you know, basically says, well, space is so huge and gigantic that there should be aliens out there, but then where are they? So I wonder what's your answer? Are they dead? Are they really far away, yet to evolve? What's most likely, do you think?
Well, there are a lot of explanations consistent with the fact that they're not here. You know, some people would say, well, the aliens are here, they're the UFOs, but again, I haven't seen evidence that convinces me. And so then the general argument of Fermi's paradox is that if they've been around for millions of years, even if space travel is kind of slow, then why haven't they come here? Well, one possibility is that they do have an ability. You know, maybe in fact, even the nearby stars are populated, but they're simply waiting for us to take the initiative. You know, if you use the Star Trek analogy, maybe they have a prime directive, but we all know that in Star Trek, once that less advanced civilization says hello, then the floodgates are open and you can communicate whatever you want. So, you know, that's what I would like to test. I'd like to test the zoo hypothesis of actually target all of the nearby stars and see whether we can evoke a response. So, you know, I think one reasonable explanation for the Fermi paradox is that there's no paradox at all. I mean, it's potentially possible. It's conceivable to travel between the stars. It takes a long time. And anything you'd really want, you can get by sending an interstellar email. So you can travel at the speed of light. It's a lot cheaper to communicate by radio signals, laser pulses, than it is to actually physically move yourself. And so that's what SETI and METI are based on, the idea that we can get most, if not all, of what we'd really want to know about another civilization a lot faster and a lot cheaper by sending and receiving electromagnetic signals.
Hey, Douglas, I have a couple questions from our chat room.
Yeah.
Someone asked, Gareth Glover asked, he's making a big fit about not having his question asked right away.
Okay,
but
Gareth Glover.
Does the United Nations have a protocol in place for first contact if we do make contact with aliens?
The United Nations does not, but, you know, if Gareth has an inroad to the Secretary General of the United Nations, send the contact information, because I would love it if the United Nations made this their top priority. The reality is they haven't. In fact, there is an international SETI group called the International Academy of Astronautics that has a group of ongoing SETI people that have been working 40 or more years. And they've developed protocols. So the protocols that guide what happens if we make contact have been developed by the scientists who are actually doing SETI. And so those protocols say if we detect a signal, first of all, confirm it and then transmit. And those protocols also say that in the event of detecting a signal, there should be no reply until there has been international consultation. But one of the big debates of that SETI group within the International Academy of Astronautics over the course of several years was, well, should that protocol apply before we've made contact? And the majority, a strong majority, said repeatedly, we're not even going to touch that issue because the situation is quite different. You know, if we actually make contact, you can bet the United Nations will take this up. But in the meantime, your hands are tied if you're waiting to get permission from the United Nations. You know, if you look at international space law to give you guidelines about what to do, one of the basic principles of international law is that if something isn't prohibited, it's allowed. And we've tried to get space lawyers involved, and what they point out is that the legal framework isn't easy to apply to extraterrestrials because laws are meant to regulate the interactions between human beings. They're not even constructed to regulate what we do with other beings. So the basic restrictions on communicating are at this point regulatory. You need a license from your home country to be able to transmit. And so those are the ways that there are some restrictions on communication.
Does anyone know when the Space Lawyers reality show goes into production?
I think they have an
really
opening.
I'm going to start working on that.
Good.
That's right. I know some great people who'd be guests for you.
I have a couple more. There's a lot of people in our live stream chat that are saying, can the aliens please take Donald Trump with them when they come? But also there's someone, Weapon X, in our YouTube chat is asking, do you believe that aliens are already here and live amongst us?
You know, I don't, because I've had no one come up to me and introduce him or her or itself. So it is easy to create a conspiracy theory about there being hidden information. Honestly, I don't know that the U.S. government or any other major government is able to keep a secret like that. I mean, they can barely deliver the mail. So I don't hold out a lot. But what do you do with the conspiracy theory of saying the aliens are here, but they're keeping it a secret? I don't know what to do with that. So I haven't seen the evidence. Again, if there is some concrete physical evidence that you can share with me, I want to see it.
I heard some news story that Hillary Clinton said that she would release all these documents about aliens if she was president, but
well,
that probably was a joke.
You know, Jimmy Carter, when he became president, said, I want to know, and, release the information. And I don't know if he got follow through or not, but we don't know anything since then.
That's cool.
So, I wonder, taking kind of the long view of things, I imagine with the work you do, you probably end up thinking a lot about the human race as much as you think about alien races. So I wonder if overall, if you would consider yourself pessimistic or optimistic about our long-term future. And let me frame this kind of in terms of, the way the new space industry is very often framed. People like Elon Musk say we need to get to Mars to become a multiplanetary species because we're ruining the Earth. And so there's this very pessimistic view. But I've been to a few space conferences. One guy at a space conference started talking about, I don't care what happens on Earth. We need to colonize, Mars and the asteroid belt, because imagine what 100 quadrillion humans, like the potential of that. Which is not a view you hear very often. I wonder which one resonates more with you.
I think it's a cop-out to say that we can't control our own fate, and so we need a backup plan. I mean, I think it's fine. I think it's good to explore. I think it's sort of in our genes. We're an exploratory species, so let's go out there. But I sometimes hear people say, if we discover aliens out there, if we actually pick up a signal from an extraterrestrial, finally we'll have vindication. We can do it. We can last that long. We don't need to look outside to get that vindication. Even if no one else has done it, humankind should do it. And the big opposition within SETI circles to a sustained METI project is not any concerns about aliens. It's a concern that we're not mature enough to be able to sustain a project that's going to last over the course of centuries and millennia. My view is we have nothing to lose. I think the having the image of humans as a species that can look to the future, make plans for the future, and hope and act as if we will be around to get a reply back can do nothing but good. And so in a subtle way, I think that the actions of preparing for contact and preparing to be around can have a salutary impact on how we view ourselves as a species And it is as much an act of hope as it is an act of scientific exploration.
I'm curious if you are aware of or your thoughts on the organization The Long Now, which is also based here in San Francisco, and they have a great bar, everybody, The Interval. Check it out.
The Long Now, I agree. Go to The Interval. The Long Now has exactly the mindset that we need, because they are building a clock that will last on a time scale of 10,000 years. And, scientific research is not funded on 10,000 year time scales. We're looking, when scientific research is funded by Congress, you've got representatives who are elected every 2 years and senators every 6 years. Everyone is thinking on such short time scales.
Or even shorter. I mean, if something becomes popular, suddenly the president's out there saying, then we're going to Mars.
We're going to Mars. And even if you get an individual president who's committed to going to Mars, that president has 8 years, and a new president comes in and upends the agenda and says, sorry, not Mars, asteroids. So the mindset of The Long Now is the perfect mindset of saying, we humans at the beginning of the 21st century are used to instant gratification. We want everything in this now. Mm-hmm. But if we're going to survive as a species, we need to extend that now. And so that it lasts until the end of the day and the end of the week and the year and the decade and the century and the millennium, and maybe even 10,000 years.
But when funding and political support can change on a dime, how do you in practical terms work for The Long Now or similar concepts?
Well, I think you have to, first of all, look for some funding that can sustain a long-term project like an endowment, and you identify models that aren't as resource intensive. So, for example, SETI is typically operated by big projects, a big project that takes millions of dollars per year. It's great. You build it up. You have that money for a decade. If the money disappears, then the project disappears. And even if you get more funding a few years later, you have to build the group from scratch. So the approach we're using at METI International is a different model where we're using more modest telescopes, like the one that Ben Schutz is operating. Go to opticalseti.org and you'll see his observatory in Panama.
Oh, yeah.
And that is, it's not just a run-of-the-mill backyard astronomer's telescope, but it is technically sophisticated. He's a retired engineer. He's put his heart and soul in this, but it is operated by someone who's doing it out of love. I mean, the true meaning of being an amateur. And so that is sustainable, that he has the resources on his own to make his contributions. You combine that with other smaller scale observatories, and we can really have an ongoing effort that isn't reliant on these massive influxes of money, that can sustain itself over the course of decades.
So it's sort of citizen science on an organized scale.
Citizen science on an organized scale. And, the beauty of that, and one of the things that we encountered when we were using that telescope to observe Boyajian star, is it was visible from Panama at the worst possible time in Panama because it was the rainy season. So out of the course of about 4 weeks of observing, we only had a half a dozen clear nights. So you want other observatories where it's a good observing and you can coordinate the activities. So there's a modest amount you can do at one location, but you multiply that by 10 or by 100, you can get a lot done. And if we actually do detect a signal, so we're looking at Boyajian star, we see exactly what we want. We want to make sure that someone else can track that star when it sets in Panama and is visible somewhere else.
So the most important question before we wrap up is, are you a sci-fi fan? And if so, which franchises?
I have to say that Close Encounters is the one. It had special meaning because, I was a kid. I was about 16 when this thing came out. And the aliens come and you're actually able to make contact. So that would have to be toward the top of the list. If you're looking at franchises, I would say Star Trek. And from the perspective of creating an interstellar message or really trying to understand aliens, I'm going to give the first half a dozen episodes or so of Enterprise, when their linguist was really grappling with trying to understand. it's endlessly fascinating. I could have taken 5 seasons of that grappling myself, but in sci-fi, you have to make concessions and actually let everyone speak English pretty soon. But I'll give those first few episodes of the Enterprise relaunch.
All right, great. Well, before we wrap things up, anything else you want people to know about METI?
Yeah, check out our website. It's METI.org. Come to our Facebook page. We are always updating materials. And keep on the lookout for what we'll be doing in the coming months. We'll be doing more to really grapple with the whole question of what is intelligence here on Earth and what does that mean beyond. And so I look forward to letting people know about that as well.
That's a whole can of worms right there.
It is indeed.
All right, well, Douglas Vakoch, thank you very much for joining us on the CraveCast, and we'll be sure to keep in touch and keep people informed on your work here on Crave on CNET. And I want to thank everyone else. Stephen Beecham, thank you so much for helping set this up, and of course Kelsey Adams and Jeff Sparkman. Bonnie Burton is sick today. We hope you are feeling better, and we'll see you on the next CraveCast. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time.